Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat edition of our class, Perashat Beha'alotekha. Perashat Beha'alotekha is a complex parasha. The question today is, what happened to Moshe Rabbeinu? What happened to good old Moshe? Let's explain. After some introductory, fascinating parts of this parasha that we're going to skip over, Am Yisrael was ready to march into Eretz Yisrael, and it says that amongst them there were those who had complained. It doesn't say about what. HaKadosh Baruch Hu thought it to be an act of evil. He angered and he punished them. He devoured, it said, with a fire certain segments of the nation. Right afterwards, it says that Asafsuf, Hachamim tell us, or the Erev Rab, those who are the not original members of our nation who were latched on from Misraim, amongst them started a trend of desiring, where they physically desired certain types of foods out there in the desert. It says it started to cry, Am Yisrael tagged along with them. And they started speaking in an absurd manner and remembering the good old days of Misraim, the oppression of Misraim. They spoke of them as the good old days, where we were able to eat all these types of vegetables. They described them as delicacies, and as if we had everything that we needed. We were satiated out there back there in Misraim, and now we're dry, we're empty. All we have is this man. And parenthetically, the Torah tells us the man was everything that anyone could have ever dreamed of in terms of dietary practice, but they ignored that. And they cried and they complained. It's unclear whether this is a separate episode or a continual episode from the first one. That's a discussion among the commentators. And they cried amongst families in their tents. And at that point, Moshe Rabbeinu had heard enough. And he said, and we'll quote and paraphrase some as well. If you're following, we're in Perek Yud Aleph, we're in Pasuk Yud Aleph, 11:11. And Moshe Rabbeinu says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why have you done this to me, your loyal servant? Why have I not found favor in your eyes? Lasum, it masa kol ha'am hazeh ala. You placed the burden of this nation upon me. Ha'anochi hariti et ha'am hazeh. Im anochi retihu. Did I give birth to this nation? As in telling me, instructing me, and holding me responsible to carry them in my bosom, the way that a nurse would carry the nursing baby. How could I possibly feed this entire nation? How is it possible for me to satiate them and to calm their issues and complaints? How can I reconcile this? I can't do it. I can't bear them, and I can't carry the responsibility of tending to them on my shoulders alone. If this is your decision, God, then please kill me and don't see my downfall. What happened to Moshe Rabbeinu? This is not only our rabbi, this is our defender, this is our protector. This is the same Moshe Rabbeinu who saw seemingly much more difficult times. Only in recent months, it's less than a year prior to this, the terrible debacle of Het HaEgel. He came to the rescue of the people. They were deserving and they earned annihilation from the mouth of God. And he put on what is still most probably the greatest defense presentation in the history of mankind to save them from utter obliteration. Moshe Rabbeinu, who was always there as their defendant, their protector, their advocate. Later on in the Het HaMeragelim, in that tragic sin and consequence of it, we see him take on the same role. We know Moshe Rabbeinu to stick up for the people. We know him to bear the brunt. We got used to our rabbi as being the one who speaks on our behalf and can do it all, can do anything. The last time he complained to HaKadosh Baruch Hu personally was the very first few days of his career when he first approached Paro. We haven't heard a word of such approach since that point in time. What has happened? There's been an absolute crumbling of the great, seemingly, in Moshe Rabbeinu's, call it complaint, in his charge, in his difficulty that he expresses to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What happened to Moshe Rabbeinu? Fast forward, past HaKadosh Baruch Hu's not just suggestion, but directive to recruit 70 elders to help him out, past where Hashem provides birds to eat, meat to eat for the people, past where he punishes them, and after they satiate and eat to their heart's desire, and seemingly kills many, we get to the incident of Miriam and Aharon, the seemingly faithful and dedicated brother and sister of Moshe Rabbeinu, speaking about him regarding the Isha Kushit that he married. And they said, did God only speak to us? He spoke to Moshe as well. And they seemingly spoke Lashon Hara, as our Hakamim tell us. God appears to summons all three of them to the Mishkan, appears suddenly and speaks to them about the distinction between their prophecy and all other prophets and Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy. And he smites Miriam HaNevi'ah with Sara'at, leprosy, her hand, she turns white, and they wait for her, and Haron prays for her. What went on in that story? And what exactly was the impetus for Aharon and Miriam to speak about Moshe Rabbeinu, and how did HaKadosh Baruch Hu resolve that issue? And was it at all, and is it at all connected and attached to the incident that the shocking incident that we just recited of Moshe Rabbeinu's complaint to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So in order to resolve all of this, I'm going to be using as a partial guide and help the assistance of a great class given many years ago, Alav Shalom, by Rabbi Soloveitchik, the famous Rabbi Yosef Dov J.B. Soloveitchik. It's actually last year on this class, in this parasha, that I gave a class to this audience, or at least most of this audience, that was Rabbi Soloveitchik's understanding of the first, you can call the first half of this parasha. You can refer back to that class. But this is a continuation, but an addressing of the incidents I just spoke of, along with the help of other commentators, along with some embellishment of my own. Let's go back to Moshe Rabbeinu and the speech that he gave HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the seeming complaint, the shocking words of pushback, and you can almost say defiance, but certainly you can say on Moshe Rabbeinu's part, apprehension to lead and almost a giving up of his will and energies to be able to serve the people. Moshe Rabbeinu, to this point in time, we see him as the leader of the nation in the capacity of an educator. That's what he signed up to be. He signed up to be a teacher, to be a rabbi, to be the chief rabbi, to be the prophet, to be the greatest, as described by Hashem at the end of the parasha, the greatest prophet in history, communicated with God and brought that communication as a conduit back to the people, who taught them Torah, who brought Torah down to this world and disseminated and educated Torah to the rest of Am Yisrael. That's what he signed up for, that's how he functioned, and that's what he felt his task to be. In this parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu learned a hard, cold truth, that there was so much more to his job than he ever dreamed and imagined. As with this sin, which seems to be incomparable really to Het HaEgel at first glance, and later on to Het HaMeragelim, the sin of the spies, which were affronts to God himself, seeming to be involved possibly with Avodah Zarah back then, and other more, you can say, egregious acts and sins throughout the desert stay of the nation. But explains Rabbi Soloveitchik that this was different. This was a sin that had no motives. The sin of complaining, the sin of desiring was their demonstration in what he calls a paganistic lifestyle, not necessarily paganism per se and idolatry, but a paganistic lifestyle in which they saw the pursuit of hedonism, physical desires, wanting to satisfy and satiate every whim and urge and desire of theirs, seemingly an irrational complaint about the good old days of Egypt and a rejection of the great man, the gift from heaven, and complaining for the sake of pure desire. But in that act of evil that God saw as evil and punished them for that, Moshe Rabbeinu realized something else. They're putting this on my shoulders. My responsibility goes way beyond simply teaching, judging, guiding, and educating this nation, Torah in a spiritual, so to speak, manner. My responsibility, it seems, to be able to respond to their every need, every physiological need, every limitation of their lives becomes focused and funneled to me, falls on my shoulders, and it is my responsibility. And in the words of Moshe Rabbeinu, I am handicapped. And he calls himself a male nurse. The Nesiv in the Emek Davad points out that he says, you asked me to take care of these people, to carry them in my bosom, kasher yisa ha'omen et hayonek. Not the omenet. The omenet is a nursemaid, is a non-natural mother who nurses a child. Omen is in the masculine, lashon zakah, and still try to somehow care for the child, the infant. And he explains that that is a handicap and a disadvantage from two sides. On one hand, I am not the biological parent. The biological parent often gets a pass from the child because he feels a great affinity and connection to the parent. And therefore, even though may disagree, may be upset at the parent, but because of that natural connection, that blood connection, the parent will get a pass from the child. There'll be a leniency, so to speak, from the child. On the other hand, even if someone's not a parent, but they can provide physically to this infant, like the nurse can, the wet nurse can, well, that's also a type of physiological connection in which the child has such a great need and reliance upon that nursemaid that also there's a limitation to how much lack of love there might be expressed. But me, Moshe says, in this metaphor that he used, not a biological parent, nor someone that can provide naturally for the sustenance and the physical needs of these people. I'm not equipped. I can't do it. He suddenly realized that he has a responsibility that's so much more expansive than he ever imagined. And therefore he told HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why have you put the burden on me? I can't serve the people properly. My entire life is dedicated. I'm a servant of the public. I'm subject myself to their needs, but in a way that I thought, equipped, competent, able to address, and now I can't. You've told me to hold them like a male nurse tends to a child, to an infant. I can't feed them. I can't provide for their needs. I need to serve them, and yet I can't. Lo uchal anochi lebadi. I can't do this alone. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not you, it's me. I'm incompetent, and I can't serve my people properly. And if I can't, what am I doing here? The Emek Davad further explains, who is a great answer, is a great, Rabbi Soloveitchik, incidentally, is is a lineage of the Nasiv. He's a great ancestor of Rabbi Soloveitchik. That Moshe says, if you are preserving me because of my respect, because of your respect for me as leader, then I have the solution. Kill me and replace me. Let me out of my misery and my sorrow, not being competent enough to serve the nation of God. Moshe Rabbeinu not only here was not complaining about his position or about the nation, but quite the opposite. He was complaining about himself. He was bemoaning the fact that in this newfound responsibility and burden on his shoulders, he was not the proficient leader he thought he was. And therefore, it's not his place to lead this nation. They deserve better and they need better. And so in this desperate time, Moshe Rabbeinu thought not only not selfishly, but completely selflessly and only about the nation. That's what overcame Moshe Rabbeinu at this very moment. Interestingly, in part of God's resolution, when he appointed 70 elders to try to throw some of the burden off his shoulders, it was only from an educational standpoint, so that Moshe Rabbeinu could eventually be the leader to tend to all their needs, and especially their physical needs, because God responded by saying, you are the one, you are the complete leader, you have the goods, you just need a little bit of assistance. And with that, we're able to travel to the end of the Perashat and possibly reconcile the Moshe and Miriam, the Aharon and Miriam scene. How could the great prophetess and prophet, Miriam and Aharon, the great leaders, the dedicated brother and sister, speak of their brother? What were they speaking of? Well, they speak of the fact explicitly in the Perashat that Moshe Rabbeinu took an Isha Kushit. There are multiple opinions of who they're referring to. Are they referring to possibly an African princess that he had, according to some Mefarshim in secular history, when he was a king in Africa for many decades? Is it referring to Sipporah, who was really dark for whatever reason? It was referring to Sipporah, his wife, that was so beautiful, and that's what Kushit means. For now, that's irrelevant for this discussion. But what is relevant is that it says Hasher Lakach, that he took, implying, according to Hachamim, that he married her, but then separated himself from her. Doesn't necessarily mean a divorce, but certainly physically and seemingly in the regular routine of his life. We do not hear of the wife and children of Moshe Rabbeinu from the time that Yitro transported them to the desert, and the rest of the stay in the desert for 40 years, practically, we hear nothing from them. And in fact, the reason is because they practically didn't exist, because Moshe Rabbeinu separated himself from them. And came Aharon and Miriam, and they said, we're prophets as well. We're leaders as well. Did God only speak to you, to us? He spoke to you as well. Meaning that a leader has to find time in his physical life with his regular responsibilities of family and tending to his wife and his children and all of the other regular burdens of life over and above that, to tend to your career and to your duties, and in this case, your community and your nation. We're doing it. What gave you the right to become angelic on us? Not to be a family man. We don't understand why this unconventional approach was taken by you. And quite frankly, we're upset, said Aharon and Miriam. According to the Ora Haim, they actually spoke in the presence of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is what made his lack of response so super impressive, and which is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu recites in the next pasuk that he was anav, more humble than any man in the face of the earth or in the history of mankind. But Aharon and Miriam didn't understand something about their brother Moshe, and God had to explain to them in a demonstrative way. So he summons all three of them to Ohel Moed. And it says that he appeared to Aharon, Miriam, and Moshe pitom, suddenly. And they were taken aback, jolted. What was that? Said Aharon and Miriam. What just happened? They're not used to this. They've never felt that sensation. They've never experienced this phenomenon of an unprepared, impromptu appearance of God in communication. And God went on to explain that you are like the other prophets. I appear to you in dreams and visions, in semi-conscious states. Of course, you weren't ready. You normally have to prepare for a prophecy. You have to sometimes even request a prophecy. It has to be a scheduled prophecy. Did you feel that? Did you experience that just now? Well, that's the life of your brother Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Aharon and Miriam, he has no life. He has no personal life. He doesn't function like you do. He doesn't go exercise. He doesn't have a catch with his son and do his homework with him. He doesn't have a talk with his wife on the dinner table. He doesn't take vacations. He can't, because he's a leader of the people, a quintessential leader, a perfect prototype of a leader, the Jewish leader, the one who surrenders himself to the nation completely. Did you feel that? That sensation was his life. I appeared to him with no notice whatsoever. He prophesizes without warning. He has to be ready for duty at every single moment. There is no preparedness and readiness for Moshe because he's constantly on duty. It never ends for him. Do you understand? Don't ever speak about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Avdi, he's called over here, my servant, because no one is like him. And no one is responsible for the people like him. And no one gives his life to Am Yisrael like him. That is the Jewish leader. And they learned, and they understood, and they were sorry, and they were slightly punished, and they were restored, and things came back to normal. But for now, and that point and on, us, Am Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu himself understood what he was and what the ultimate leader of Am Yisrael is and will always be. One who's dedicated to the people at the expense of all else in his life, because he stands as the figure and model of God among the people and provides for them at every moment all their spiritual and physical needs. That was our Rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu, the most dedicated, the most wise, the most prophetic, the most humble, but above all else, there for us more than any leader that we've ever had in the history of Am Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.